Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Adventure and Mystery Book Club. I'm Bill Mallory, branch manager of the La Jolla Library. So glad you could join me for today's reading of King Solomon's Mines. We are reading chapters 3 and 4 of King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard. I'm really looking forward to this because I read this back in high school, and now we get to revisit it, and it's just, fun stuff's gonna happen. So, just before I begin, real fast, hopefully you've had a chance to check out the library marketing has done a new Facebook image for our group on the Facebook page. And so kudos to them for doing a stellar image for King Solomon's Mines, the way they have done for all the previous ones. Also, I want to give a big shout out to branch manager of the Pacific Beach Library, Christina Wainwright, who does the Tea With series. She is reading uh, various books and having really good tea along with those titles. And the current title is Tea with Dracula. So if you have not had a chance to check that out, I forgot how creepy it was actually, and it's really creepy. So since she does the tea with every reading, she was very kind to get this right here, which has arrived. It is the Sherlock blend of tea, and she sent that to me, and because we did Hound of the Baskervilles, our very first reading was Hound of the Baskervilles, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so awesome! I would love to try this, and then of course I realized I don't have a tea infuser. I don't have anything to make it with. But fortunately, one of our people here had one, and it looks like this. This is it, and I can't do this like Christina Wainwright can do it, but I'm going to try. This is a black tea, the Sherlock blend, a dark, foreboding mix of lapsang souchong and sweet vanilla with chocolate, citrus, and caramel notes. This mysterious tea, has a smoky edge with hints of hidden ingredients. Hidden ingredients. It's a mystery. So, I brewed this. You can sort of see it, the sort of very sort of nice caramel color that is. And then Susan, who provided the tea thing, also gave me one of these adorable little teacups. However, as nice as this is, and this is very nice, it's not really my style. So I brought from home my Popeye mug because, of course, when you're not eating spinach, the next best thing is tea. So there we go. So let's try this out. I have not tasted this yet. This is going to be a test here. Let's see if I can do this right where the camera is. Okay, this has been steeping for a little bit now, so let's see how it is. When you smell it, it actually is very smoky. It has kind of a smoky kind of aroma to it. That's quite good, actually. It's a black tea, so which is I mean, normally I just stick with the usual Earl Grey and just kind of, because I'm a creature of habit, so I tend to do the same thing. And Earl Grey is good. So this is a very nice black tea. Hmm. Yeah, it's a little more citrusy. It's funny, but it's not overpowering. So that's really, really actually very nice. So thank you very much, Christina Wainwright, for letting me expand my tea horizons and giving me a chance to kind of check out different teas, and that was quite nice. That's actually very good. I really enjoyed that. Be sipping on that throughout our reading today, which we'll start with chapter 3 of King Solomon's Mines. I am going to apologize at the very beginning because there are some words that are kind of a bit of a tongue twister. Um, and so this they may give me pause. Some of the fictional names of the African countries and the locations and people and things are a little interesting. Makes me wonder what Mr. Haggard was thinking when he was naming these folks. Clearly, he was not reading them out loud. I also, speaking of our Facebook page, I did post a picture which I tried to show on the book last time, of a map that was a hand drawn map supposedly that they had found, and it was the map to the fictional land of Kukwana land, which comes up over and over again in future stories. But this one takes place in Kukwana land, and that illustration that I posted on the Facebook page is what is supposedly a hand drawn map that was found with the from someone who had tried to go there and failed. So just to briefly recap what we read in chapters 1 and 2, our stalwart hero, explorer, and a hunter, Alan Quatermain, has, um, by chance, while on a ship voyage back to South Africa, he met two men, Captain Good and Sir Henry Curtis, and these two men were hoping to meet him because, and apparently it was some sort of serendipitous sort of meeting in the sense that they weren't expecting to see him on the boat, but they were hoping to find him anyway because one of the Sir Curtis's brother has gone missing, and he was gone missing while searching for the fabulous diamond mines of King Solomon. So, in the heart of Africa, there is apparently a place that is surrounded by desert, and he's known several people who have gone in search of this, and nobody has come back alive. One person, he tells a story sort of in flashback form. One person comes back and is emaciated and thin. He's got no muscles anymore, and his skin is yellow, and his eyes are like sockets, just empty sockets, because he's so thin and he has had no nourishment. And he makes it back to camp after several weeks of trying to find this, and eventually dies. And that doesn't last very long, but this is the man for whom that they have this map, and they have gotten the idea that the fabulous diamond mines of King Solomon are in this particular area of Kukwana land. So here we are. Basically, it was really very interesting because he's Alan Quatermain is 55 years old as we start this story. This is the first of the stories. There were many other Alan Quatermain stories, but many of them would go backwards to show him as a young man. I believe the first story featuring him actually has him at 18 years old, but they were written after. So this is actually the first book, and he's already 55 years old, and so when they give him this, hey, we really like you to lead this expedition. We really want to find King Solomon's mines. And he's like, no, I have a young son, and well, he's not young. He's he's training to be a doctor, so he's 20s, and he says, that my son needs me, and he needs someone to provide for him, and I can't just go away and do whatever I want to do. And so they basically say, you know what, you can write your own check. You can make us. I mean, we'll pay you whatever you want, and if that helps your son in his studies to be a doctor, well, there it is. And so, as I think most people would, Alan Quatermain takes the job. And so, with that in mind, let us start chapter 3, which is entitled Umbopa Enters Our Service. It takes from 4 to 5 days, according to the speed of the vessel and the state of the weather, to run up from the Cape to Durban. Sometimes, if the landing is bad at East London, where they have not yet not yet made that wonderful harbor they talk so much of, and sink such a mint of money in, a ship is delayed for 24 hours before the cargo boats can get out to take off the goods. But on this occasion, we had not to wait at all, for there were no breakers on the bar to speak of, and the tugs came out at once with the long strings of ugly, flat-bottomed boats behind them, into which the packages were bundled with a crash. It did not matter what they might be. Over they went, slap bang. Whether they contained china or woolen goods, they met with the same treatment. I saw one case holding 4 dozen of champagne, smashed all to bits. And there was the champagne fizzing and boiling about in the bottom of the dirty cargo boat. It was a wicked waste, and evidently so the Kaffirs in the boat thought, for they found a couple of unbroken bottles, and, knocking off the necks, drank the contents. But they had not allowed for the expansion caused by the fizz in the wine, and feeling themselves swelling, rolled about on the bottom of the boat, calling out that good liquor was tagati, that is, bewitched. I spoke to them from the vessel and told them it was the white man's strongest medicine, and that they were as good as dead men. Those Kaffirs went to the shore in a very great fright, and I do not think that they will touch champagne again. Well, all the time that we were steaming up to Natal, I was thinking over Sir Henry Curtis's offer. We did not speak any more on the subject for a day or two, though I told them many hunting yarns, all true ones. There is no need to tell lies about hunting, for so many curious things happen within the knowledge of a man whose business it is to hunt. But this is by the way. At last, one beautiful evening in January, which is our hottest month, we steamed past the coast of Natal, expecting to make Durban Point by sunset. It is a lovely coast all along from East London, and its red sandhills and wide sweeps of vivid green, dotted here and there with Kaffir kraals, and bordered by a ribbon of white surf which sprouts up in pillars of foam where it hits the rocks. But just before you come to Durban, there is a peculiar richness about the landscape. There are the sheer kloofs cut out of the hills by the rushing rains of centuries, down which the rivers sparkle. There are deep greens of the bush growing as God planted it, and the other greens of the mealy gardens and the sugar patches, while now and again a white house smiling out at the placid sea puts a finish and gives an air of homeliness to the scene. For to my mind, however, however beautiful a view it may be, it requires the presence of man to make it complete, but perhaps that is because I have lived so much in the wilderness and therefore know the value of civilization, though to be sure it drives away the game. The Garden of Eden, no doubt, looked fair before man was, but I always think that it must have been fairer when Eve adorned it. To return, we had miscalculated a little, and the sun was well down before we dropped anchor off the point, and heard the gun which told the good folks of Durban that the English mail was in. It was too late to think of getting over the bar that night, so we went comfortably to dinner after seeing the mails carried off in the lifeboat. When we came up again, the moon was out and shining so brightly over the sea and shore that she almost paled the quick, large flashes from the lighthouse. From the shore floated sweet, spicy odors that always reminded me of hymns of missionaries. And in the windows of the houses of the Berea sparkled 100 lights. From a large brig lying near also came the music of the sailors as they worked at getting the anchor up in order to be ready for the wind. Altogether, it was a perfect night, Such a night as you sometimes get in southern Africa, and it threw a garment of peace over everybody as the moon threw a garment of silver over everything. Even the great bulldog belonging to a sporting passenger seemed to yield to its gentle influences, and forgetting his yearning to come to close quarters with a baboon in its cage on the forecastle, snored heavily at the door of the cabin, dreaming, no doubt, that he had finished it, and happy in his dream. We three, that is, Sir Henry Curtis, Captain Good, and myself, went and sat by the wheel and were quiet for a while. "Well, Mr. Quatermain," said Sir Henry presently, "have you been thinking about my proposals?" "Aye," echoed Captain Good. "What do you think of them, Mr. Quatermain?" "I hope that you are going to give us the pleasure of your company as far as Solomon's Mines, or wherever the gentleman you know as Neville may have got to." I rose and knocked out of my pipe before I answered. I had not made up my mind, and wanted an additional moment to decide. Before the burning tobacco had fallen into the sea, I had decided. Just that little extra second did the trick. It is often the way when you have been bothering a long time over a thing. "Yes, gentlemen," I said, sitting down again, "I will go, and by your leave I will tell you why and on what conditions. First, for the terms which I, number one, I'm sorry, first for the terms which I ask. Number one, you are to pay all expenses, and any ivory or other valuables we may get is to be divided between Captain Good and myself. Two, that you give me £500 for my services on the trip before we start, I undertaking to serve you faithfully till you choose to abandon the enterprise, or till we succeed or disaster overtakes us. Three, that before we trek you execute a deed agreeing in the event of my death or disablement you pay my boy Harry, who is studying medicine over there in London at Guy's Hospital, a sum of £200 a year for 5 years, by which time he ought to be able to earn a living for himself, if he is worth his salt. That is all, I think, and I dare say you will say quite enough too." "No," answered Sir Henry, "I accept very gladly. I am bent upon this project, and would pay more than that for your help, considering the peculiar and exclusive knowledge which you possess." "Pity I did not ask it then. But I won't go back on my word, and now that I have got my terms, I will give you my reasons for making up my mind to go." Excuse me. This is a good time for tea. "First of all, gentlemen, I have been observing you both for the last few days, and if you will not think me impertinent, I may say that I like you, and believe that we shall come up well to the yoke together. That is something, let me remark, when one has a long journey like this before one. And now as to the journey itself. I tell you flatly, Sir Henry and Captain Good, that I do not think it probable that we can come out of it alive. That is, if we attempt to cross the Suleiman Mountains. What was the fate of old Dom de Silvestre 300 years ago? What was the fate of his descendant 20 years ago? What has been your brother's fate? I tell you frankly, gentlemen, that as their fates were so, I believe ours will be." I paused to watch the effect of my words. Captain Good looked a little uncomfortable, but Sir Henry's face did not change. "We must take our chance," he said. "You may perhaps wonder," I went on, "why, if I think this, I, who am, as I told you, a timid man, should undertake such a journey. It is for two reasons. First, I am a fatalist, and believe that my time is appointed to come without reference to my own movements and will, and that if I am to go to Suleiman's Mountains to be killed, I shall go there and shall be killed. God Almighty, no doubt, knows his mind about me, so I need not trouble on that point. Secondly, I am a poor man. For nearly 40 years I have hunted and traded, but I have never made more than a living. Well, gentlemen, I don't know if you are aware of the average life of an elephant hunter from the time he takes to the trade is between 4 and 5 years. So you see, I have lived through about 7 generations of my class, and I should think that my time cannot be far off anyway. Now, if anything were to happen to me in the ordinary course of business, by the time my debts are paid, there would be nothing left to support my son Harry, while he was getting in the way of earning his bread. Whereas now, he will be set up for 5 years. There is the whole affair in a nutshell. Mr. Quatermain, said Sir Henry, who had been giving me his most serious attention, your motives for undertaking an enterprise which you believe can only end in disaster reflect a great deal of credit on you. Whether or not you are right, of course, time and the event alone can show. But whether you are right or wrong, I may as well tell you at once that I am going through with it to the end, sweet or bitter. If we are to be knocked on the head, all I have to say is that I hope that we get a little shooting first. Good? Yes, yes, put in the captain. We have all 3 of us been accustomed to face danger and to hold our lives in our hands in various ways, so it is no good turning back now. And so I vote we go down to the saloon and take an observation just for luck. And just for luck, you know. And we did. Through the bottom of the tumbler. Next day we went ashore, and I put up Sir Henry and Captain Good at the little gray shanty I have built on the Berea, which I call my home. There are only 3 rooms and a kitchen in it, and it is constructed of a green brick with a galvanized iron roof, and there is a good garden and the best loquat trees that in it that I know, and some nice young mangoes, of which I hope great things. There we go. The curator of the botanical gardens gave them to me. It is looked after by an old hunter of mine named Jack, whose thigh was so badly broken by a buffalo cow in Sikukuni's country that he will never hunt again. But he can potter about in the garden, and being a Griqua by birth, you will never persuade a Zulu to take much interest in gardening. It is a peaceful art, and peaceful arts are not in his line. Sir Henry and Good slept in a tent pitched in my little grove of orange trees at the end of the garden, for there was no room for them in the house. What with the smell of the bloom and the sight of the green and golden fruit, in Durban you will see all 3 on the tree together. I dare say it is a pleasant place enough, for we have few mosquitoes here on the Berea, unless there happens to come an unusually heavy rain. Well, to get on, for if I do not, Harry, you will be tired of my story before ever we fetch up at Suleiman's Mountains. Having once made up my mind to go, I set about making the necessary preparations. First, I secured the deed from Sir Henry, providing for you, my boy, in case of accidents. There was some difficulty about its legal execution, as Sir Henry was a stranger here, and the property was to be charged over the water. But it was ultimately got over with the help of a lawyer, who charged £20 for the job, a price that I thought outrageous. Then I pocketed my check for £500. Having paid the tribute to my bump of caution, I purchased a wagon and a span of oxen on Sir Henry's behalf, and beauties they were. It was a 22-foot wagon with iron axles, very strong, very light, and built throughout of stink wood. Not quite a new one, having been to the diamond fields and back, but, in my opinion, all the better for that, for I could see that the wood was well seasoned. If anything is going to give in a wagon, or if there is green wood in it, it will show out on the first trip. This particular vehicle was what we call a half-tented wagon, that is to say, only covered in over the after 12 feet, leaving all the front part free for the necessaries we had to carry with us. In this after part, we were a hide cartle or bed on which two people could sleep, also racks for rifles and many other little conveniences. I gave £125 for it and think that it was cheap at the price. Then I bought a beautiful team of 20 Zulu oxen, which I had kept my eye on for a year or two. 16 oxen is the usual number for a team, but I took 4 extra to allow for casualties. These Zulu cattle are small and light, not more than half the size of the Afrikander oxen, which are generally used for transport purposes. But they will live where the Afrikanders would starve, and with a moderate load can make 5 miles a day better going, being quicker and not so liable to become footsore. What is more, this lot were thoroughly salted, that is, they had worked all over South Africa and so had become proof, comparatively speaking, against red water, which so frequently destroys whole teams of oxen when they get onto the stage veldt, or grass country. Excuse me. As for the lung sick, which is a dreadful form of pneumonia, very prevalent in this country, they had all been inoculated against it. This is done by cutting a slit in the tail of an ox and binding in a piece of the diseased lung of an animal which has died of the sickness. The result is that the ox sickens, takes the disease in a mild form, which causes its tail to drop off, as a rule about a foot from the root, and becomes proof against future attacks. It seems cruel to rob the animal of his tail, especially in a country where there are so many flies, but it is better to sacrifice the tail and keep the ox than to lose both tail and ox, for a tail without an ox is not much good, except to dust with. Still, it does look odd to trek along behind 20 stumps, where there ought to be tails. It seems as though nature had made a trifling mistake and stuck the stern ornaments of a lot of prize bulldogs on the rumps of the oxen. Next came the question of provisioning and medicines, one which required the most careful consideration, for what we had to do was to avoid lumbering the wagon, and yet to take everything absolutely necessary. Fortunately, it turned out that Good is a bit of a doctor, having at some period in his previous career managed to pass through a course of medical and surgical instruction, which he had more or less kept up. He is not, of course, qualified, but he knows more about it than many men who can write MD after his name, as we found out afterwards, and he had a splendid traveling medicine chest and set of instruments. Whilst we were at Durban, he cut off a Kaffir's big toe in a way that it was a pleasure to see. But he was quite nonplussed when the Kaffir, who had sat stolidly watching the operation, asked him to put on another, saying that a white one would do in a pinch. There remained, when these questions were satisfactorily settled, 2 further important points for consideration, namely that of arms and that of servants. As to the arms, I cannot do better than put down a list of those which we decided on from among the ample store that Sir Henry had brought with him from England, and those which I owned. I copy it from my pocketbook where I made the entry at the time. Quote, 3 heavy breech-loading double-8 elephant guns weighing about 15 pounds each to carry a charge of 11 drachms of black powder. 2 of these were by a well-known London firm, most excellent makers, but I do not know by whom mine, which is not so highly finished, was made. I have used it on several trips and shot a good many elephants with it, and it has always proved a most superior weapon, thoroughly to be relied on. Three double 500 expresses constructed to stand a charge of 6 drachms, unquote. Sweet weapons and admirable for a medium-sized game such as eland or stable antelope, or for men, especially in an open country and with the semi-hollow bullet. Quote, 1 double number 12 central fire keeper's shotgun full choke both barrels, unquote. This gun proved to be the greatest service to us afterwards in shooting birds for the pot. Quote, 3 Winchester repeating rifles, not carbines, close quote, spare guns. Quote, 3 single-action Colt revolvers with the heavier or American pattern of cartridge, end quote. This was our total armament, and doubtless the reader will observe that the weapons of each class were of the same make and caliber, so that the cartridges were interchangeable. A very important point. I make no apology for detailing it at length, as every experienced hunter will know how vital a proper supply of guns and ammunition is to the success of an expedition. Now, as to the men who were to go with us, after much consultation, we decided that their number should be limited to 5, namely, a driver, a leader, and 3 servants. The driver and leader I found without much difficulty. 2 Zulus named respectively Goza and Tom, but to get the servants proved a more difficult matter. It was necessary that they should be thoroughly trustworthy and brave men, as in a business of this sort our lives might depend upon their conduct. At last I secured 2, one a Hottentot called Ventvogel, or Windbird, and one a little Zulu named Kiva, who had the merit of speaking English perfectly. Ventvogel I had known before. He was one of the most perfect spoorers, that is, game trackers, I have ever had to do with, and tough as whipcord. He never seemed to tire. But he had one failing, so common with some people, his drink. Put him within reach of a bottle of gin, and you could not trust him. However, as we were going beyond the region of grog shops, this little weakness of his did not so much matter. Having secured these men, I looked in vain for a third to suit my purpose, and so we determined to start without one, trusting to luck to find a suitable man on our way up country. But as it happened, on the evening before the day we had fixed for our departure, the Zulu Kiva informed me that a Kafir was waiting to see me. Accordingly, when we had done a dinner, for we were at table at the time, I told Kiva to bring him in. Presently, a tall, handsome-looking man, somewhere about 30 years of age and very light-colored for a Zulu, entered and, lifting his knob stick by way of salute, squatted himself down in the corner on his haunches and sat silent. I did not take any notice of him for a while, for it is a great mistake to do so. If you rush into conversation at once, a Zulu is apt to think you are a person of little dignity or consequence. I observed, however, that he was a keshla, or ringed man, that is, he wore on his head the black ring made of a species of gum, polished with fat and worked up in the hair, which is usually assumed by Zulus on attaining a certain age or dignity. Also, it struck me that his face was familiar to me. "Well," I said at last, "what is your name?" "Umbopa," answered the man, in a slow, deep voice. "I have seen your face before." "Yes, the Inkosi, the chief, my father, saw my face at the place of the little hand, that is, Isendlwana, on the day before the battle." And then I remembered. I was one of Lord Chelmsford's guides in that unlucky Zulu war, and took part in the battle, which I had the good fortune to survive. I will say nothing about it here. Indeed, the subject is painful to me. On the day before it happened, however, I fell into conversation with this man. who held some small command among the native auxiliaries, and he had expressed to me his doubts as to the safety of the camp. At the time, I told him to hold his tongue and leave such matters to wiser heads, but afterwards I thought of his words. "I remember," I said. What is it you want?" "It is this, Makumazan." That is my Kafir name. And means the man who gets up in the middle of the night, or, in vulgar English, who keeps his eyes open. "I hear that you go on a great expedition far into the north with the white chiefs from over the water. Is it a true word?" "It is." "I hear that you go even to the Lukanga River, a moon's journey beyond the Manik country. Is this so also, Makumazan?" "Why do you ask whither we go? What is it to you?" I answered suspiciously, for the objects of our journey had been kept a dead secret. "It is this, O white men, that if indeed you travel so far, I would travel with you." There was a certain assumption of dignity in the man's mode of speech, and especially in his use of the words "O white men" instead of "O Inkosis" or chiefs, which struck me. "You forget yourself a little," I said. "Your words run out unawares. That is not the way to speak. What is your name, and where is your kraal? Tell us, that we may know with whom we have to deal." "My name is Umbopa. I am of the Zulu people, yet not of them. The house of my tribe is in the far north. It was left behind when the Zulus came down here 1,000 years ago, long before Chaka reigned in Zululand. I have no kraal. I have wandered for many years. I came from the north as a child to Zululand. I was Setaweo's man in the Nikombakosa, Nikombaso. This is going to be a problem. Nikoma Bakosi. There we go. Regiment, serving there under the great captain okay, here we go. Umslapogasi of the Axe. There's a footnote here at this point that says, for the history of Umslapogasi and his axe, the reader is referred to the books called Allan Quatermain and Nada the Lily. Editor. Who taught my hands to fight. Afterwards, I ran away from Zululand and came to Natal because I wanted to see the white man's ways. Next, I fought against Setaweo in the war. Since then, I have been working in Natal. Now, I am tired and would go north again. Here is not my place. I want no money, but I am a brave man and well worth my place and meat. I have spoken. I was rather puzzled by this man and his way of speech. It was evident to me from his manner that in the main he was telling the truth, but somehow he seemed different from the ordinary run of Zulus, and I rather mistrusted his offer to come without pay. Being in a difficulty, I translated his words to Sir Henry and Good, and asked them their opinion. Sir Henry told me to ask him to stand up. Umbopa did so, at the same time slipping off the long military greatcoat which he wore, and revealing himself naked except for the mucha, waistcloth, around his center, and a necklace of lion's claws. Certainly he was a magnificent-looking man. I never saw a finer native. Standing about 6'3" high, he was broad in proportion and very shapely. In that light, too, his skin looked scarcely more than dark, except here and there were deep black scars, marked old assage wounds. Sir Henry walked up to him and looked into his proud, handsome face. "They make a good pair, don't they?" said Good. "One as big as the other." "I like your looks, Mr. Umbopa. I will take you as my servant," said Sir Henry in English. Umbopa evidently understood him, for he answered in Zulu, "It is well," and then added with a glance at the white man's great stature and breadth, "We are men, thou and I." Time are we looking at here? Okay. We might go a little bit over today. Chapter 4, An Elephant Hunt. Now, I do not propose to narrate at full length all the incidences of our long trek up to Sitanda's Kraal near the junction of the Lukanga and Kalukwe rivers. It was a journey of more than 1,000 miles from Durban, the last 300 or so of which we had to make on foot, owing to the frequent presence of the dreadful tsetse fly, whose bite is fatal to all animals except donkeys and men. We left Durban at the end of January, and it was in the second week of May that we camped near Sitanda's Kraal. Our adventures on the way were many and various, but as they are of the sort which befall every African hunter, with one exception to be presently detailed, I shall not set them down here, lest I should render this history too wearisome. At Inyati, the outlying trading station in the Matabele country, of which Lobengula, a great and cruel scoundrel, is king. With many regrets, we parted from our comfortable wagon. Only 12 oxen remained to us out of the beautiful span of 20 which I had bought at Durban. One we lost from the bite of a cobra, 3 had perished from poverty and the want of water, 1 starved, and the other 3 died from eating the poisonous herb called the tulip. 5 more sickened from this cause, but we managed to cure them with doses of an infusion made by boiling down the tulip leaves. If administered in time, this is a very effective antidote. The wagon and oxen we left in the immediate charge of Goza and Tom, our driver and leader, both trustworthy boys, requesting a worthy Scotch missionary who lived in this distant place to keep an eye on them. Then, accompanied by Umbopa, Kiva, Ventvogel, and half a dozen bearers whom we hired on the spot, we started off on foot upon our wild quest. I remember we were all a little silent on the occasion of this departure, and I think that each of us was wondering if we should ever see our wagon again. For my part, I never expected to do so. For a while we tramped on in silence until Umbopa, who was marching in front, broke into a Zulu chant about how some brave men, tired of life and the tameness of things, started off into the vast wilderness to find new ones, or die, and how, lo and behold, when they had traveled far into the wilderness, they discovered that it was not a wilderness at all, but a beautiful place full of young wives and fat cattle, of game to hunt and enemies to kill. Then we all laughed and took it for a good omen. Umbopa was a cheerful savage in a dignified sort of way, when he was not suffering from one of his fits of brooding, and he had a wonderful knack of keeping up our spirits. We all grew very fond of him. And now, for the one adventure to which I'm going to treat myself, for I do dearly love a hunting yarn. About a fortnight's march from Inyati, we came across a peculiarly beautiful bit of well-watered woodland country. The kloofs of the hills were covered with dense brush, idoro bush, as the natives call it, and in some places with the wacht-een beke, or wait a little thorn, and there were great quantities of the lovely macabel tree, laden with refreshing yellow fruit, having enormous stones. This tree is the elephant's favorite food, and there were not wanting signs that the great brutes had been about, for not only was their spoor frequent, but in many places the trees were broken down and even uprooted. The elephant is a destructive feeder. One evening, after a long day's march, we came to a spot of great loveliness. At the foot of a bush-clad hill lay a dry riverbed in which, however, were to be found pools of crystal water, all trodden round with the hoofprints of game. Facing this hill was a park-like plain where grew clumps of flat-topped mimosa, varied with occasional glossy-leaved macabell, and all round stretched the sea of pathless, silent bush. As we emerged into this riverbed path, suddenly we started a troop of tall giraffes, which galloped, or rather sailed, with their strange gait, their tails screwed up over their backs, and their hooves rattling like castanets. They were about 300 yards from us, and therefore practically out of shot, but Good, who was walking ahead and who had an express loaded with solid ball in his hand, could not resist temptation. Lifting his gun, he let drive at the last a young cow. By some extraordinary chance, the ball struck it full on the back of the neck, shattering the spinal column, and that giraffe went rolling over head over heels just like a rabbit. I never saw a more curious thing. "Curse it," said Good, for I am sorry to say that he has a habit of using strong language when excited, contracted, no doubt, in the course of his nautical career. "Curse it, I've killed him." "Oh, Bhagwan!" ejaculated the Kafirs. "Oh, oh!" They called Good Bhagwan, or Glass Eye, because of his glass eyes. Because of his eyeglass. There we go. "Oh, Bhagwan!" re-echoed Sir Henry and I, and from that day Good's reputation as a marvelous shot was established, at any rate among the Kafirs. Really, he was a bad one, but whenever he missed, we overlooked it for the sake of that giraffe. Having set some of the boys to cut off the best of the giraffe meat, we went to work to build a sherm near one of the pools and about 100 yards to its right. This is done by cutting a quantity of thorn bushes and piling them in the shape of a circular hedge. Then the space enclosed is smoothed, and dry tambuki grass, if obtainable, is made into a bed in the center, and fires lighted. By the time the sherm was finished, the moon peeped up, and our dinners of giraffe steaks and roasted marrow bones were ready. How we enjoyed those marrow bones, though it was rather a job to crack them. I know of no greater luxury than giraffe marrow, unless it is elephant's heart, and we had that on the morrow. We ate our simple meal in the light of the moon, pausing at times to thank Good for his wonderful shot. Then we began to smoke and yarn. And a curious picture we must have made, squatting there round the fire, I with my short, grizzled hair sticking up straight, and Sir Henry with his yellow locks, which were getting rather long, made rather a contrast, especially as I am thin and short and dark, weighing only 9 stone and a half, and Sir Henry is tall and broad and fair, and weighs 15. But perhaps the most curious looking of the three, taking all the circumstances of the case into consideration, was Captain John Good, R.N. There he sat upon a leather bag, looking just as though he had come in from a comfortable day's shooting in a civilized country, absolutely clean, tidy, and well dressed. He wore a shooting suit of brown tweed, with a hat to match, and neat gaiters. As usual, he was beautifully shaved, with his eyeglass and his false teeth appeared to be in perfect order. And although he looked the neatest man I had ever had to do with in the wilderness, he sported a collar of which he had a supply made of gutta percha. "You see, they weigh so little," he said to me innocently, when I expressed my astonishment at the fact, "and I always like to turn out like a gentleman." Ah, if he could have foreseen the future, the raiment prepared for him. Well, there we three sat yarning away in the beautiful moonlight, and watching the Kafirs a few yards off sucking their intoxicating daka from a pipe, of which the mouthpiece is made of the horn of an eland, till one by one they rolled themselves up in their blankets and went to sleep by the fire. That is, all except Umbopa, who was a little apart, his chin resting on his hand, and thinking deeply. I noticed that he never mixed much with the other Kaffirs. Presently, from the depths of the bush behind us came a loud woof, woof. That's a lion, said I, and we all started up to listen. Hardly had we done so when, from the pool about 100 yards off, we heard the strident trumpeting of an elephant. In Lovu, elephant, elephant, whispered the Kaffirs. And a few minutes afterwards we saw a succession of vast, shadowy forms moving slowly from the direction of the water toward the bush. Up jumped Good, burning for slaughter and thinking perhaps that it was as easy to kill an elephant as he had found it to shoot giraffe. But I caught him by the arm and pulled him down. It's no good, I whispered. Let them go. It seems that we are in a paradise of game. I vote we stop here a day or two and have a go at them, said Sir Henry presently. I was rather surprised, for hitherto Sir Henry had always been for pushing forward as fast as possible, more especially since we ascertained at Inyati that about 2 years ago an Englishman of the name of Neville had sold his wagon there and gone up country. But I suppose his hunter instincts got the better of him for a while. Good jumped at the idea, for he was longing to have a shot at those elephants. So, to speak the truth, did I, for it went against my conscience to let such a herd as that escape without a pull at them. All right, my hearties, said I. I think we want a little recreation, and now let's turn in, for we ought to be off by dawn, and then perhaps we may catch them feeding before they move on. The others agreed, and we proceeded to make our preparations. Good took off his clothes, shook them, put his eyeglass and his false teeth into his trousers pocket, and, folding each article neatly, placed them out of the dew under a corner of his mackintosh sheet. Sir Henry and I contented ourselves with rougher arrangements, and soon were curled up in our blankets and dropping off into the dreamless sleep that rewards the traveler. Going, go. What is that? Suddenly, from the direction of the water came sounds of violent scuffling, and next instant there broke upon our ears a succession of the most awful roars. There was no mistaking their origin. Only a lion could make such a noise as that. We all jumped up and looked toward the water, in the direction of which we saw a confused mass, yellow and black in color, staggering and struggling towards us. We seized our rifles and, slipping on our veltschons, that is, shoes made of untanned hide, ran out of the scherm. By this time the mass had fallen and was rolling over and over on the ground, and when we reached the spot it struggled no longer, but lay quite still. Now we saw what it was. On the grass there lay a stable antelope bull, the most beautiful of all the African antelopes, quite dead, and transfixed by its great curved horns was a magnificent black-maned lion, also dead. Evidently what had happened was this. The stable antelope had come down to drink at the pool where the lion, no doubt the same which we had heard, was lying in wait. While the antelope drank, the lion had sprung upon him, only to be received with the sharp curved horns and transfixed. But once before I saw a similar thing happen. Then the lion, unable to free himself, had torn and bitten at the back and neck of the bull, which, maddened with fear and pain, had rushed on until it dropped dead. As soon as we had examined the beast sufficiently, we called the Kaffirs, and between us managed to drag their carcasses up to the scherm. After that we went in and lay down, to wake no more until dawn. With the first light, we were up and making ready for the fray. We took with us 3 8-bore rifles, a good supply of ammunition, and our large water bottles filled with weak, cold tea, which I have always found the best stuff to shoot on. After swallowing a little breakfast, we started, Umbopa, Kiva, and Ventvogel accompanying us. The other Kaffirs we left with the instructions to skin the lion and the stable antelope and cut up the latter. We had no difficulty in finding the broad elephant trail, which Ventvogel, after examination, pronounced to have been made by between 20 and 30 elephants, most of them full-grown bulls. But the herd had moved on some way during the night, and it was 9 o'clock and already very hot, before, by the broken trees, bruised leaves and bark, and smoking droppings, we knew that we could not be far from them. Presently we caught sight of the herd, which numbered, as Ventvogel had said, between 20 and 30, standing in a hollow, having finished their morning meal and flapping their great ears. It was a splendid sight, for they were only about 200 yards from us. Taking a handful of dry grass, I threw it into the air to see how the wind was. For if once they winded us, I knew that they would be off before we could get a shot. Finding that, if anything, it blew from the elephants to us, we crept on stealthily, and, thanks to the cover, managed to get within 40 yards or so of the great brutes. Just in front of us, and broadside on, stood 3 splendid bulls, one of them with enormous tusks. I whispered to the others that I would take the middle one, Sir Henry covering the elephant to the left, and Good, the bull with the big tusks. Now, I whispered. Boom, boom, boom went the 3 heavy rifles, and down came Sir Henry's elephant, dead as a hammer, shot right through the heart. Mine fell onto its knees, and I thought he was going to die, but in another moment he was up and off, tearing along straight past me. As he went, I gave him the second barrel in the ribs, and this brought him down in good earnest. Hastily slipping in 2 fresh cartridges, I ran up close to him, and a ball through the brain put an end to the poor brute's struggles. Then I turned to see how Good had fared with the big bull, which I had heard screaming with rage and pain as I gave mine its quietus. On reaching the captain, I found him in a great state of excitement. It appeared that on receiving the bullet, the bull had turned and come straight for his assailant, who had barely time to get out of his way, and then charged on blindly past him in the direction of our encampment. Meanwhile, the herd had crashed off in wild alarm in the other direction. For a while we debated whether to go after the wounded bull or to follow the herd, and finally decided for the latter alternative, departed, thinking that we had seen the last of those big tusks. I have often wished since that we had. It was easy work to follow the elephants, for they had left a trail like a carriage road behind them, crushing down the thick brush of their furious flight as though it were tambuki grass. But to come up with them was another matter, and we had struggled on under the boiling sun for over 2 hours before we found them. With the exception of one bull, they were standing together, and I could see from their unquiet way and the manner in which they kept lifting their trunks to test the air that they were on the lookout for mischief. The solitary bull stood 50 yards or so to this side of the herd, over which he was evidently keeping sentry, and about 60 yards from us. Thinking that he would see or wind us, and that it would probably start them off again if we tried to get nearer, especially as the ground was rather open, we all aimed at this bull, and at my whispered word we fired. 3 shots took effect, and down he went dead. Again the herd started, but unfortunately for them, about 100 yards further on was a nullah, or dried-out water track, with steep banks, a place very much resembling the one where the Prince Imperial was killed in Zululand. Into this the elephants plunged, and when we reached the edge, we found them struggling in wild confusion to get up the other bank, filling the air with their screams and trumpeting as they pushed one another aside in their selfish panic, just like so many human beings. Now was our opportunity, and firing away as quickly as we could load, we killed 5 of the poor beasts, and no doubt should have bagged the whole herd, had they not suddenly given up their attempts to climb the bank and rushed headlong down the nullah. We were too tired to follow them, and perhaps also a little sick of slaughter, 8 elephants being a pretty good bag for one day. So after we were rested a little, and the Kafirs had cut out the hearts of 2 of the dead elephants for supper, we started homewards, very well pleased with our day's work, having made up our minds to send the bearers on the morrow to chop away the tusks. Shortly after we repassed the spot where Good had wounded the patriarchal bull, we came across a herd of eland, but did not shoot at them, as we had plenty of meat. They trotted past us and then stopped behind a little patch of bush about 100 yards away, wheeling round to look at us. As Good was anxious to get a near view of them, never having seen an eland close, he handed his rifle to Umbopa, and, followed by Kiva, strolled up to the patch of bush. We sat down and waited for him, not sorry of the excuse for a little rest. The sun was just going down in its reddest glory. Sir Henry and I were admiring the lovely scene when suddenly we heard an elephant trumpet and saw its huge and rushing form, with uplifted trunk and tail silhouetted against the great fiery globe of the sun. Next second we saw something else, and that was Good and Kiva tearing back towards us with the wounded bull, for it was he, charging after them. For a moment we did not dare to fire, though at that distance it would have been of little use that we had done so, for fear of hitting one of them. The next a dreadful thing happened. Good fell victim to his passion for civilized dress. He had consented to discard his trousers and gaiters like the rest of us, and to hunt in a flannel shirt and a pair of veltschones. It would have been all right, but as it was, his trousers cumbered him in that desperate race, and presently, when he was about 60 yards from us, his boot, polished by the dry grass, slipped, and down he went on his face in front of the elephant. We gave a gasp, for we knew that he must die, and ran as hard as we could towards him. In 3 seconds it had ended, but not as we thought. Kiva, the Zulu boy, saw his master fall, and the brave lad as he was, turned and flung his assegai straight into the elephant's face. It stuck in his trunk. With a scream of pain, the brute seized the poor Zulu, hurled him to the earth, and placing one foot onto his body about the middle, twined its trunk around the upper part and tore him in 2. We rushed up, mad with horror, and fired again and again, till presently the elephant fell upon fragments of the Zulu. As for Good, he rose and wrung his hands over the brave man who had given his life to save him, and though I am an old hand, I felt a lump grow in my throat. Umbopa stood contemplating the huge dead elephant and the mangled remains of poor Kiva. "Oh, well," he said presently, "he is dead, but he died like a man." And that slightly gory ending is the conclusion of chapter 4. Wow, that was quite a chapter there. I will tell you that this is an example of Alan Quatermain being Alan Quatermain, but that does not really, I think, reflect the story as it is. It's certainly exciting, but it's just that's not something you kind of see in modern literature these days. But there it is, the elephant hunt, and hunting up any other animals as well. Thank you very much for joining me today for these two chapters of King Solomon's Mines. I hope you will join me again on Friday. It will be a pre-recorded session on Friday because we're doing an alternating Friday, Saturday, and I don't actually work on Friday. But it will be pre-recorded on Friday. I hope you can be there for that and enjoy the next two chapters, 5 and 6, as we continue with our tale. And while we do that, I'll be enjoying this lovely tea. Thanks, everyone. Have a good time.